Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening and how are you doing today? How's your podcast coming along? I am Chris and I am from the original Chris and Christine Show podcast. You know, you can find out every single thing you want to know about that show on and over on the website, which is chrisandchristineshow.com. And yeah, there's a link to that into the show notes of every single episode. So I got you covered. Don't worry about a single thing. But here on Podtastic Audio, where I help you create and design an amazing podcast and make sure it sounds fantastic and amazing without having to spend amazing amounts of cash to get the job done. You do not need to drop $10,000 on a podcast to make sure it sounds great. In fact, you can have an amazing podcast with merely only spending about $100, which can be more popular and more valuable to the listener compared to a show that just spent $5,000 on gear. So in the long run, you want to make sure that your show delivers value to your listener. You know, your listener is actually giving you their time to listen to your podcast. Do not disappoint them. Make sure it sounds amazing and it's clever and it's got good content and it's very valuable. And that each and every episode they say, you know what? That was a great show. And they want to share it with their friends and family and all that great, wonderful stuff. And hopefully they'll subscribe and then maybe they'll listen to the next one and to the next one. And I know that not every single podcast will please every single listener out there. It's just the way it is. You know, I was kind of thinking, have you ever watched something on, say, Netflix or Disney Plus, any kind of streaming platform, and you turn on the movie and you're watching this movie because it looked great from the little clip they had, or maybe the description looked great. So you push play on the movie and you start watching it for a little bit. It might be like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes into the movie. You're like, this movie's kind of boring. Like, it's not what I thought it was going to be. So I'm just going to turn it off and then just go watch something else. Now you kind of think is, what made you turn that movie off? Was it because it was boring? Probably. Maybe because it was something you weren't really interested in. So when you create a podcast, you want to make sure your listener doesn't do that with your podcast. So basically, moral of the story is, don't be boring when you podcast. You want to podcast about something you truly love, yes, but you also want to think, what is the listener at the other end? How are they experiencing this? Maybe you should listen to your podcast through the ears of a listener. It's kind of hard to do because you just recreated it. That's why they say it's probably best to go back in time and listen to some of your episodes you did maybe like 2 or 3 months ago. Listen to them because that gives you kind of a fresh idea. You didn't just record it, so you kind of have a fresh ears when you play it back. I've done that from time to time. Go back and listen to some of my older episodes, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should have changed this or should have said that or something or whatever it could be. You know, it makes it feel like a brand new thing all over again for yourself. It's really, think of it as like a teaching tool because you always can improve your podcast. No matter whose podcast it is, they always can use improvement and always be evolving your show to make sure that each episode is better than the last. And if you need help figuring out if your podcast is on the right track, you always can send me your podcast and I will review it for you for free. A link to that is in the show notes of this episode today. So today on Podtastic Audio, I have a fantastic VIP guest talking all about podcasting, Ahron Wohlgelernter, coming to me from Israel, which happens to be like on the other side of the planet. And it sounds as if he's sitting right here in the studio with me. Now, how did we pull that off? Did we fly him into the studio here in San Diego? Or did I take a plane ride and fly all the way over to Israel? Well, you're going to have to figure that out on your own. But here, joining me all the way from Israel to talk all about podcasting, he is a podcast producer and a podcast editor. So he knows more about podcasting than most people do. He helps you and businesses create a podcast from scratch get them up, get them going, coaching, the whole 9 yards. We talk all about podcasting and whether or not video is even important for a podcast. So please welcome to the show, Ahron Wohlgelernter.
I'm doing awesome. What amazing thing that we have this technology that can connect us all over the world. It is so exciting.
It is exciting. I was kind of wondering, how does this even work? Because I heard that there's actually some like cables that go under the ocean that connect all of us all together. And that's how we're actually talking right now, is that if you think about it, like our voices are now under the water of the ocean.
Yeah, it's like trippy when you start thinking about how in the world my audio, how do I talk to the rest of the world? And I find it always when I talk to my kids and they're like, what's the internet? Then I'm like,
You ever remember a time before the internet? You know what that was even like? You know, way back in the day. Yeah. You know, that's crazy, man. So you're in Israel right now, and so what you doing over there, man?
So I've been living here for the last 10 years. This is a wonderful culture, a wonderful startup culture here. Tech and startup companies. It's a huge center for that and a really exciting place to be. And I'm currently here with my wife and my 4 children.
Look at that. Now, Israel, what is the currency they use over there?
We use NIS, New Israeli Shekel.
Is it, what's the conversion rate to dollars to that?
It's about 4, about 3.5 or 4. It fluctuates, but somewhere around that.
So it's pretty,
dollar.
So it's higher or lower than the dollar?
It's lower than the dollar.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So dollar's worth more, right? So it's kind of kind of like the pesos to the dollar, but not quite that extreme. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so is it warm over there right now? Are you guys in winter still?
We're winter, but listen, it's no San Diego winter, but it's not. It's nothing close to an East Coast winter. We're still the desert, but we have some rain. You know, it gets cold, but what's cold? Maybe in the 50s. You know. Nothing too bad.
In the summer, do you guys get 120 out there?
It gets hot. It gets hot out here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned to you before we started, I grew up in San Diego too. And you always want to say like, oh, come on. Like you're out there, you're out for 10, 15 years. Like, no, man, I don't even know how to buy a winter coat. It is in my bones, man. It is in my head. I do not know how to throw a snowball. I do not know how to, I do not know how to prepare myself for the rain or prepare myself for the 6 months of winter. It's in me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, me too. Hey, speaking of, as we record this today, as we've had this like monsoon of rain come through San Diego and all of Southern California and really all of California, I think about it. They call this atmospheric rivers just hitting the West Coast. And now I think if you ever heard, you always keep hearing, if you live in San Diego, you always hear, oh, we're in a drought. We need the rain. We're in a drought, right? I don't think anymore. I think now with all these rainstorms we've had, I think we flipped it over. We are now no longer officially in a drought in California. Isn't that crazy?
That is incredible.
It was more rain to know what to do with. Last night coming home, it was like rain all over the freeway and I was like sliding all over the road. Like it was like lakes all over the freeway. It was nuts. So Ahron, podcasting, when did you first start to get yourself into doing anything with podcasting?
So I think my journey is similar to one that you mentioned earlier. Was I love audio. I love this ability to be able to consume podcasts and learn. It's like this great marriage between long form, but not consuming your whole head and your whole eyes and all of your elements there. It's like you can go and do things. You can walk, you can drive, you can bathe the kids or be cleaning up the house while you're consuming and while you're learning. And that was just incredible for me to consume that way. And I thought of some ideas of shows. I started them on my own. And I was starting my first show I actually recorded on a phone with a sock to be like a pop filter.
Over like the phone microphone or something?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Did that work?
I only did a couple episodes like that, but I should go back and listen to them. I think it was acceptable. for the phone. But that was like, the YouTube. That was what I learned how to do from YouTube. That this is a good way to do it. I went into a closet. I tried to just take away all the sound, and I put a put a sock over the mic and recorded that way. So I really started on my own podcast pretty scrappy.
Well, like we all do,
Yeah, and I'm in love with that because I really learned the whole process, and I was able to then take that audio and learn how to edit it, and then teach myself all these different areas of what it takes to produce the podcast. But really fell in love also with the creation of the show, with what are we going to talk about, who we're going to talk about, using scripts to be able to help us tell this story with our guest. And there's something really, it's really powerful when you listen back to that episode that you've created. Like, wow, we actually created a good flow here and a good conversation. And that was something that I always thought that I was going to be the podcaster, be the famous one, be the one who made my my Spotify deal.
Yeah.
When that didn't happen.
Oh man.
So when that didn't happen, I decided that I think I had there was a certain energy and a certain talent that I had to be able to work with people, to be able to find their voices and to bring out the power of conversation for them, both in their businesses and their organizations. So that was this like move towards helping others produce their podcast. And that's brought me to here, to really double down on launching podcasts, being involved in the full idea, the full podcast, the full production from the beginning. What are we talking about? Who are we talking to? Who is our listener? How do we stay consistent? How are we going to get past 100 episodes and really just map that out from the beginning? It's been an incredible process for me to watch so many people who didn't trust themselves to be able to do this. They didn't believe that they really had this power to have these conversations and to ask these questions and to position themselves as thought leaders, and over time just watch them grow into that role.
That's fantastic. So in Israel, is podcasting quite as popular as here in the US?
Oh yeah.
Really?
So in Israel, it's used in two ways. It's used locally, so in the local language in Hebrew.
Okay, I thought so, yeah.
Also used in a way to open up to a global market. So like I mentioned, here in Israel is a huge tech startup scene, and that's a global market. They're not just looking for the Israeli sales. They're looking for the whole world, and they're really nice. It's like positioned that way. They can work with Europe. They can work with the US. And so they're doing podcasts to now branch out to the whole world. It's incredible.
As you should be. I know when I was looking at our stats on the Chris Christine show, and I remember I think we did see Israel as one of the countries being played. And I was like, whoa, check that out. And it's kind of fascinating when you start your podcast and whatever small town you're in right now, and you realize like, oh, someone listened to it in California. Oh, someone listened to it in Australia. Someone listened to it in Israel. You're like, whoa, like my voice is getting like being heard in other parts of the world, places that I've never visited myself. Yet my voice is being there, which is kind of a trip to think about. It's kind of like a mind trip,
Yeah.
So as far as like podcasting, and you help other podcasts kind of get going, have you had any of the people come through to you to say something like, hey, it's like, say, two buddies in a microphone drinking beers, just fart jokes and stuff. You ever had any of those guys come to you and want help?
I'll branch out in that question. I think that I try to be more focused for a podcast. I think that those are hard to really find success with. This is, and I don't know if I'm stepping on a mine here, but I think that I don't know if you have the drink and fart podcast. I don't know, but I think that those, you really have to be very talented. There's this one show.
What do you mean by talented? Like talented how? Like very clever?
Okay. In order to make that engaging for the listener, if you have the listener in mind, that has to be done well. And let me get more specific. You have to be talented in keeping the conversation funny and but yet flowing and not go too deep onto one, not kill one fart joke 100 times over because you can attack it because you have the time, and you're drinking.
Right.
So like just to be, you got to still have some sort of script to it. And I think it gets more into like, the sitcom, like, I think about The Office. The genius of The Office was that it was totally scripted. It was a show.
Of course.
But it seemed like to us that this thing was happening like in real time, right? And that there were mistakes, and they left in the ums and the ahs, and the video sometimes, the camera genius of the camera there in The Office, that it sometimes missed the main character, and it was videoing somebody else, and there was a conversation going on with the video camera. So that kind of thing was all scripted out and written by extremely talented writers. And so if you're going to have writers write your podcast, then, great. But if it's just going to literally be two guys who, maybe have never done stand-up or never really done improv or are not so talented at these things, then I find them, just as a listener, not to be that interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of those shows, I mean, if they're having fun, I would say go right ahead. If fun is your goal, then you guys are succeeding doing your thing, and congratulations. I'm sure you and your 12 cousins probably enjoy it immensely. It's your thing and all that. But the thing that gets me is that some of these shows that do that, they immediately go into, we're starting a Patreon, or we're going to get sponsors, or we're going to be blah, 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 go down the list, of ways to monetize that. But like you said, I don't think it's very easy to monetize a show like that. And that's why I don't think, this is my opinion, I don't think drinking on a podcast where you just get sloshed and you're trying to record is a very good, it can't be enjoyable to listen to, especially when you're sober,
Right. I think that if we're talking to, it depends who you are. If you're a YouTuber and you've got this, like, a million subscribers on YouTube, and now you want to branch out to a podcast and Patreon model, that's a whole different dynamic here, because you already have a listener base and they want to hear what you have to say, and you're not trying to gain people through your podcast. But if you're starting from zero in any audience, and now you want to build this audience through the podcast, I think there has to be more of a goal, and you have to have the listener in mind when you're creating this show. That's what I think when you're starting with this specific, kind of podcast, the indie, startup, no listener, no audience, not a influencer podcast, then I really think that you have to start with more of a goal. So how does it help your business? How does it play? How does it position you as a thought leader? How do you, how are you going to create a network through this podcast? But all those are goals, which means that it's not really just going to be sitting around talking about nothing. There's going to be a goal to the podcast.
I would hope so. I mean, yeah, I know that. I think that everyone says that, like, if you niche down too much, like say you are, I don't know, a golf podcast or whatever, but then you go to a golf club podcast, and maybe you go to a golf ball. I don't know. You can go down to whatever, what are your thoughts on shows that go down niche down too much?
Yeah, it's hard to know what too much is, but like for your example, so golf for, kids under 18 who have siblings who, suffer with, with some kind of disability. That's really specific. But so I don't know how much you're going to be able to grow, but on the other hand, you will be passionate about all of those topics. And that's what comes through on a podcast. So when you can really hit your niche, it doesn't have to be that niche, but it has to be the thing that you can really be passionate about, just to have a productivity. And I want to talk about productivity and focus. Okay, that's great. But like, if you can niche that down one or two steps and talk about something that's really, really deep to you, then that'll come across again to the listener. They'll appreciate that passion. They'll appreciate your research that you do because you're interested in this stuff. And I think that's where the sweet spot is. So it's like niche, really niche, but then I don't have any, real tips how to unniche yourself.
Yeah, well, I know that at the end of the day, your listener should be the most important thing, and you should deliver value to them in some way, form, or another. And that's the way I feel. Is always think about the listener and what they hear, what they experience your podcast. Like, what do they get out of it when you're done listening to your show? Like, speaking of listening to shows, I was going to throw this question out, but I'm going to throw this question out to you: Is do you listen to podcasts at higher than normal speed?
I love that question. And I think that part B to that question is that, do I speed up podcasts when I'm editing them? Is a great,
do that
great
too.
part
That
of it
too.
too.
I'm talking about for like the listener part of it. Do you listen at like higher speed?
So it depends what I'm listening to. If it's a podcast that I just want, like I use Spotify as a search engine. I typed in productivity or work better, and then I came up with some random podcast, which I'm not, I don't listen to all the time. I might listen to it on 2X just to be able to get the information, if that's really my goal.
Okay.
But if it's a podcast that I'm enjoying, it's a podcast that, I listen to each week, and there's the community element of it, then I listen to it at a regular speed.
Yeah, I do too. I'm not a huge fan of listening to podcasts at higher speeds. I know that a lot of podcasters do. And I guess if you have like 200 podcasts to get through in a week, then I guess you kind of have to do what you got to do. But I think you miss a lot of the elements of it. And I wonder, from an editor perspective, if you listen to a podcast at, say, 1X, does it hide a lot of the imperfections in the audio?
I think it brings it. I think if you speed it up, or if you speed it up while listening, I think you hear a lot of that issue. You hear a lot of, like, maybe at 1X, a little bit of a buzz would have been acceptable because it flows, but when you're listening to it faster, so it becomes more of a high pitch buzz, and that's more annoying, right? And then if you have any imperfections in the ums get annoying, because when you were listening to it on a regular speed, they were part of the flow, but now they're just these words that are sitting in there that are messing up the fast flow. So I think some of the imperfections come out when you speed it up.
Oh, interesting. I just know that, like, a lot of the music and the tone and it just sounds like, to me, I tried it once or twice and I was like, ugh, I don't get it. I don't like it. But of course, for me, like, all of my audio experiences have always been listening to the radio. I've listened to millions of hours of radio and radio shows. So in radio shows, you can't really do that. You have to listen to it as it comes through. So that's the way I consume a lot of the audio, or most of my audio, actually. So to change that feeling and that format just doesn't feel right with me when I play things at a much faster speed. Now, that's just my perspective. So I guess if you're trying to, like, skim through the episode as fast as you can to get the content, and only the content, and just go straight through it, then I guess it's like speed reading, really. You just kind of skim through it real quick to get what you need and get out. I guess that's what you got to do. Some people do that, but for me, I don't like doing that. So it's just my thing. Yeah. So, Ahron, you do podcast editing too, right? You have podcasts that send you audio, and you have to, like, put a episode together, right?
Sure.
So, what are the common mistakes that podcasters make when they send you the files or the audio files? You give video too, or just audio, or both?
I usually do video for clips. So that's part of this, part of the podcast is to be able to then create content. So we try to get the video so that we have another element or another type of content coming out from this podcast. But I very rarely do full video, YouTube style.
Okay, gotcha. So what are the mistakes that some of these guys make when they send you the files?
I think that sending it as one synced file. I think if you're going to send it to an editor, it's always good to give them the two files for both the guest, the separate tracks, so that they can have the ability to edit them separately and independently.
Yeah, well, that's what I always say. If you can, no matter what you're recording, whether it's a Zoom call, you and a guest in the same room, you and a co-host in the same room, make sure you can try to get, if it's possible, try to get everybody on separate audio tracks and everybody on their own separate microphone. Have you ever got anybody come in where they take the Blue Yeti microphone and they stick it on the center of the table, They have the thing pointed to record in every direction, and they all sit around the table and talk. You ever get shows like that?
Yeah.
And what do you do? What do you do?
Okay. And to add to that, we're going to do this podcast. We have an empty room, and we got a great place to do it. It's going to be nice. It's going to be clean. And we're going to send you the audio, and then you get the audio back, and it's on a Blue Yeti, and the Blue Yeti was sitting on the table, and it was in a big empty, dining room or empty hall.
Right. Yeah.
So you get tons of echo.
Right. Of course.
Without the Blue Yeti being set to the right settings at all. And it's not really meant to be this, in the middle of the table, or the setting wasn't set up for that. And now, do magic. So I get that sometimes. And in general, the Blue Yeti, I don't mind going on record on this. I think that there are better starter microphones for that price point.
Oh, I agree. So, I totally agree. Like, I believe, this is my personal pick, I would say, is that the Samsung Q2U microphone is the way to go. I have 2 of them, and I also have the ATR 2100 microphones. I have 2 of those also. I bought a while back. And the nice thing with those microphones, the Samsung and the ATR, is that they can go XLR and they can go USB direct to your computer. So even without an interface, you can start using that thing right out of the box today. And it'll sound way better than that stupid Blue Yeti microphone, which is I think the Blue Yeti, I think you have to know how to use it for one. And I think that one also, I believe it's not a dynamic mic. I don't think it is. So
right.
it picks.
So it's not even right for the setting of most of these podcasters.
Right. It has to be in a completely sound booth room with padding everywhere, no reverb, nothing. And then even then it has to be on the right setting. To even be used correctly. I think everybody loves it because there's lots of YouTubers that have used it and they show their pictures and stuff. And then of course, if you look up on Amazon podcasting microphone, I think it comes up in the search results as like one of the top listed microphones.
I think I even once checked, it was like beginner podcast microphone, and that one comes up.
Gosh, that's horrible. But listen, it's simple to use. There's, like I said,
it looks nice.
It looks pretty. You know what the funny part is though, is that sometimes most people use it incorrectly. They have it pointed to the tip like a normal microphone would, and they talk into the top of it, which you're not supposed to do that. And they'll have the Blue Yeti logo turn around the other way. So they're facing the wrong direction. So they got the input on the backside and they're talking to the tip of it. And it just sounds horrible. So if you get an audio file like that and they say, hey, Aaron, work your magic. Let's fix this. I want a podcast. I want it to sound amazing. What do you do?
It depends on what they need. How if I've set the expectation from the beginning that, you give me bad audio, I cannot fix this. There's only a certain amount I'm going to play around, because really to fix all that could take hours if you're really going to play. And then they've spent $100 on a microphone and they're only one, and they're trying to keep the budget down. And then they have to sit here and pay hundreds of dollars for the hours it takes. It's not worth it anymore. They could just re-record the whole thing, buy two microphones and re-record the whole thing for the same price it would cost to edit. So I try to keep that clear, from the beginning. But if that's what we have, then for me, echo is a killer, and I try to remove as much of that echo.
What tool do you use to remove the echo? I heard there's a bunch of tools out there. Which one do you like?
I think the easiest for someone who's trying to do this on their own, which a lot of you guys are, I think that the easiest and pretty good is the Descript, what's it called? The studio sound.
Right. That's what I use. I have a subscription over there and I use it, and I use it for my client's show, drop it all in there and take care of it and stuff. The one thing I'm not too thrilled about is that when you do the removal, it does get a little clippy. I noticed with the removal, sometimes it works okay, but for the most part, it does get kind of like it takes even the breath out or the pot. It just cut those pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's not going to be perfect. Even the studio sound, if you keep it at 100%, it sometimes, if you're coming in, if you have really bad audio, then you could sound like a robot. So you got to play around with it and then maybe put it in, like if you want to get more, I always think it's just better to buy a better mic than to deal with this. But if you wanted to, you put it into a DAW and take out some echo and noise and keep on playing with it. I think it's an important lesson that when you put in bad audio, that's what you're going to get back. It might sound different, but
garbage in, garbage out, as I always say, So Ahron, what kind of microphone are you using right now?
I use the SM58, the Shure SM58.
Okay. Is that the one that's the USB XLR?
It's not.
Okay.
It is just the XLR, and it's actually interesting. So I like this microphone. The form factor is it looks like, what's the SM58? I don't know. It's the one they use on stages. It's just it looks like your classic microphone.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yes, it looks like a regular stand-up microphone, like stand-up comedy would use, right?
Exactly, which they do. I mean, this is like the industry standard of, and I think I like to use this because it's Shure quality, and it's a lot of the same the stuff as the SM7B and the MV7, but the form factor is obviously different, and it's like $60.
Oh, nice.
And I like to do that because a lot of my podcasts and a lot of people that I work with are new to podcasting and don't have the money to spend if they're making a show with they want two microphones to spend on two SM7Bs in the beginning, and then it's only an XLR mic, so now you need to run it through some sort of interface. Like that's gonna already cost you a lot for something that you're just dabbling with in the beginning.
Right.
So I like to show that you can get really good audio quality from stuff that doesn't break the bank.
That's kind of what this show is all about, man. Podtastic Audio is all about showing the listener that if they want to start a podcast, it doesn't have to cost them a ton of money to do this.
What about you? What are you coming through on?
Well, I have the Rodecaster Pro 2, but the microphone itself that I'm using is the one designed for the Rodecaster. It is the Rode Pod Mic. And I have I have like 3 of these microphones. When I find a microphone I like, I'll buy more of them. I'll try one and be like, oh, this sounds great. I'll get a couple more. So I get one for Christine. Then we have a guest. So I got 3 now. Because I've had 3 people in this room, all on the Rode Pod mics. It all sounds great through the Rodecaster. And there's even a pod mic setting right on the Rodecaster that you can click on, and then it fine tunes the microphone for the settings it needs for the Rodecaster. So it all sounds great. I like it because it's kind of like a really cheap version of like a studio broadcast microphone. It's very well built. It's built like a tank. It's all metal. They say it's designed for podcasting, really. It's a microphone designed for podcasting. I say, why not? It's not designed for anything else. So it's designed to be able to sound great in almost any environment. I do have a pop filter on it now. I don't have a straight clean thing, but I do that. And this room I'm in is not very well treated for sound. In fact, it's not treated for sound at all. It's got literally tile floors. I got a wooden desk with solid shapes to it all around the computer right in front of me. I got a couple.
That's great. And you sound great. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So, now depending on the environment, like we have a design studio in the backyard we built for our floral business, but inside there, it's completely like open and, solid everything right in there. And we do the podcast in there from time to time. And you do hear reverb. You do definitely hear some reverb in that room for sure with these microphones. I'm not a miracle worker here, but I think I like these microphones because they're only $99. They're XLR only, but they got an internal pop filter. They got an internal shock mount, and they got a little mount to it so you can kind of like hang them or put them on a pedestal or something, or however you want to mount them, So I think they sound great for $99. And some people have compared them to the SM7Bs, although the SM7B is a little bit better, but they cost like 4 times as much. So you can either buy one SM7B or you can buy 4 of these microphones, and everybody sounds great. So that's the choice I went with. I'd rather have more people have great microphones than have one person with a good microphone and the other 2 people have crap microphones, So
yeah, there are so many people who just, who come to me and they're like, okay, we bought these. I was just dealing with someone yesterday. They had a Shure MV7, which itself is the cheaper version, quote unquote, of the SM7B. It's also the Shure mic, but it's still, I think, $250 or $270. So it's coming in like US dollars, and it's coming in at a hefty price compared to the pod mic. And he was using it again on his table like someone would a Blue Yeti. So
okay.
I was like, you're getting worse quality audio than your computer because and you have this $270 mic. So let's just fix that. And it was making me really nervous. So let's just fix that.
Right. I think also more with your gear, you have to kind of figure out how to use your gear. Take some time to really play around with it before you go live. Don't make your first professional Zoom interview the first time you use any gear you're using. Oh, I'm just using this for the first time today. Let's figure this out. And then, but
you got to get used to your mic. It's like your baby, you gotta really appreciate how your voice comes into it. Should it be straight up into it? Should you be talking to the side? You got to know your mic. You got to know your voice, and you get to learn that a little bit. So at least your audio quality is coming through well. And the guest, we'll deal with the guest. We can give them a little recording etiquette as we go. But for the host and for the person who's investing in this, in the audio equipment, it's important to spend time just to build a relationship with your microphone.
Do you think the listener is a little more forgiving when the host sounds great, but the host has a guest that doesn't sound as great? Do you think the listener is a little more forgiving with that?
I think it's been like that, and I think we are more. We have been over the last, let's say 5 years of podcasting or 4, and I think that's changing. What I'm seeing a lot is a lot of people, even the guests, know that it's a better pitch for them to get onto podcasts if they say, I'm already set up with a microphone and I'm already set up with headphones. So I know how to do podcasts. And that makes for a better pitch. Like, have me on your podcast because you're going to get good audio quality from me too. I think that that's changing, or should change, that both people should have great audio quality.
We always put that into our Calendly for the Chris Gerstein Show for our guest questions, because on Calendly you can insert questions on there prior to having the interview. And one of the questions we ask is, what kind of gear do you have? Please list all of it available. And then most of them will say, oh, we'll just have a laptop mic, or the webcam, or whatever they'll say on there. Sometimes they'll say a microphone. Sometimes they'll say the Rodecaster. But a lot of them will say, laptop or iPhone or whatever. Like, oh, we kind of cringe when we see that, But, and then sometimes you'll get the guest on and we'll do our best to kind of fix the audio. With Clean Feed here, I can fix the audio live. I can do a few fixes on it. And then they'll say, well, no other show I've ever been on, they never complained about the audio. They never complained before. I'm like, really? Are they even listening? So like a Zoom show, So I think with a video, that I think you can kind of hide a lot of that bad audio when they're doing the whole video stuff, especially for like clips and stuff like that. Because I think that, like, if you look at a lot of the clips on TikTok and a lot of clips on like whatever form you use, a lot of those kind of quick little clips people do are recorded with their phone. They're outside or they're in their house dancing, whatever, playing around with their phone. So their phone's really recording it anyways. I think that people are probably more forgiving with bad audio when they're watching on a phone clip than they would a full-on podcast. But I do know that with video that I've seen, that audio seems to be second place as far as the what's their concern when making a podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So on that note, do you really even need to do a video for a podcast? Is it even necessary?
Oh, you're putting me on the hot seat. I like this. I think that, I'm not a big, shiny new objects and things, but I think that there is changes that are happening in terms of the video component of podcasting. We see that YouTube over the last, week has been making a push. I don't really know what the change is, but they're trying to optimize for YouTube for podcasts. And I definitely think that video is not going anywhere. And it's important to have video for your podcast. Like I said, I advise the new podcasts that don't focus on creating, long form, great videos, but let's just take the video and make clips from there, because you should definitely be on social with your podcast. And the great way to engage on social is through video. It's very powerful and it puts a face to the voice. But I think that when we start putting in we talk about audio equipment. If you're going to talk about video equipment in order to get the same level of quality that you've just gotten through with your audio, so then it's much more expensive. We're talking in the thousands of dollars, and we're talking about setting up a room and having a dedicated space. And if you're doing it remotely or if you're doing it live, then it's setting up a studio. And we've already talked to like a huge endeavor, and you have to be much more invested. And it's no longer a low barrier to entry, and it's now a bigger investment. So then what people do is they just record over Zoom and put out this garbage quality video with bad lighting, different lighting on both people, and it just looks odd. And again, we're okay with it as listeners. We accept it, but is that really the most professional you can sound and look? So I try to advise that let's start with audio, make that as good as we can, because there's the audio quality. There's also the show. There's also this conversation and this documented, recorded conversation that's happening and the story we're telling. Are we focusing on that, or are we focusing on, how our hair looks? So I definitely think that there's something to an audio only show as well, but I'm torn. That's the honest answer.
Yeah, I think to do video right, like you said, it's going to cost you some money. And the cameras alone are close to $1,000, and of course, not including any of the extra software you might need. And don't forget the time it takes to edit a video podcast, at least to do it correctly.
Yeah, and money. Like you're talking getting a real video editor to edit this. This is expensive.
Right, at least to do it right. And that's always kind of steered me away from the video stuff, is that like that's another whole nother like world that I'm not quite ready to quite jump into yet, financially and emotionally and time wise. Like I don't got enough hours of the day to sit there and figure out the video. And also too, the videos that I like to watch, the videos I like to create are like vacation videos and action videos and outside doing something. Like I got a couple of GoPros. I was been a big supporter of GoPro when they first started, and I've gone through many different cameras. And I would take the GoPro cameras and I would go outside with my kids, and we'd do the zoo, Disneyland, vacations, and I would record all that stuff, and I would do my best to kind of put it all together as a big video, and I'll put it on YouTube or whatever. That's what I've done with my video skills, really, which is still kind of amateurish, but that's what I like to do with video. I just can't see sitting here talking into a camera for an hour straight and putting that up as a video, as content. But people do, and I get it. And it's good to be everywhere. And I think that what really shines with video is short clips. We're talking TikTok, Instagram Reels, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever's like short form content that somebody can watch while they're scrolling through their feed and say, oh, let's see what this is about. And you got to put, if you're going to do that, you got to put like the best stuff in the video, like the gold, something that's going to want somebody to press play on the podcast or maybe subscribe. You want them to be, like it's like a commercial for your show or whatever it is you're selling. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the whole video stuff, but I get it. It's popular. I get it,
Yeah, but I think there's a world what we're going to start seeing as well. I agree to what you said, and I think the audio stuff is going to get to a place where it can exist on its own, and there's its own world where you don't need the video.
Yeah, that's true. What are your thoughts on the Clubhouse and things of that sort that came out for Twitter Spaces? That's all audio only, right? It's not video, it's just audio. So what are your thoughts on those platforms?
I like them, but I think that's a conversation that you're having, live conversation. It doesn't record well. I'm not talking about audio quality. I'm just talking about, the documentation of it, the story of it doesn't translate well to the listener. And I think that that's where podcasting is still different than that. I have a little bit of like I don't know if I'm a gatekeeper, but I also don't like when people take like a lecture, I gave a TED talk or something of that sort, and I recorded the audio and I put it up on as a podcast. It's nice and it's easy to consume, but it doesn't have the same power of the conversation or even of the narrative or of the solo podcast. It doesn't have the same power of that story being told through the audio.
Yeah, I get that. With podcasts, I always say podcasting can be pretty much whatever you want it to be. Audio wise, I always say you do it however you want to do, have fun, enjoy, do your thing. So, in your opinion, Aaron, what makes a good podcast versus, say, a bad podcast?
So, obviously, the audio quality, which we've spoken about, but I think that the story, the conversation, and there's an element even within what I'm saying that yes, it's going to be unique, and there's no format to follow. There's no script to follow that's going to make it good. You can have people who have, speech impediments and have all the X's against them for an audio only show, and they're doing great.
Nice.
Because there's no one way to do it. I mean, the Daily Stoic, right? He has like Ryan Holiday it's like a very famous podcast, and he doesn't have a voiceover kind of voice, and he does great because it's unique and it's authentic and it's him, and he's telling you this story of growing through stoicism or whatever he's trying to teach. And I think that there's creativity within this world to be able, like, how you tell this story. If you want to do it solo, or you want to do it through interviews, or you want to do it through narrative with music and sound effects, there's so much space to be creative, but it has to be. I think what makes a good podcast is that you're sort of telling the story through the audio.
So I was going to touch on something really quick, Aaron, about the having guests on your show, and I did a recent episode about this, saying how you can be solo and do a solo podcast, and you do not have to have a guest on your show. Just because you have a podcast does not mean you have to do Zoom interviews. Like, everybody kind of thinks like, oh, podcasting must be Zoom interviews or interviews in general. What do you say to somebody? Like, what tips do you give to somebody who wants to start doing podcast interviews? What do you tell them?
Well, first of all, that's a great point that you make, and that there is we say podcast is an interview, but it can also be so many other things, and there's so many other ways to do it. And as an addition to that statement, that your feed really, I believe, belongs to you. And the first while when you launch your podcast, you have your listeners have patience for you, that if you want to do 3 episodes of solo and then throw in an interview, or the opposite, that they're okay with that. They want to grow with you, and they want to watch how this thing is going to take off. And they don't mind, the feed sort of belongs to you, and you can do what you want on there. So if you want to try different styles, or you want to try more of a story and a narrative podcast, I believe that's great as well. So you really have the ability to try the different things. When it comes to starting to interview, I think that it's very important to communicate, especially if your guest is somebody who's not a podcast pro, they don't do a lot of these, they don't know the culture or the style of a podcast. It's important to communicate to them where we're trying to get to with this conversation. Here's the goal. Here's even some sample questions that I might talk about. Make them comfortable before you get into the interview. And I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, it definitely does. That's why I always try to have a little chit chat before we get going. And I've heard of some show. I was talking to somebody recently, a guest I had on. He told me that he got onto a podcast as a guest, and the second he logged on to the show, they were already recording. And he's like, "What?" Not even like a little, nothing. It just straight up, like, as soon as he clicked on, there they go. And it kind of threw him off a little bit. But I think it also helps if you kind of have a little bit of conversation, a little dialogue. What are your thoughts on the pre-interview interview? Is that required? I mean, I don't really do those. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for most podcasts and for most people, you can do it without that. If you're dealing with big, you got a really big guest on, and somebody that's very important, that's really going to change your brand, or it's very important to you, it might be worth it. But I think that for the standard interviews, there with a little bit of communication before the interview day and with a little bit of research on your end, on the host's end, I don't think it's that important.
Yeah, I always hear, yeah, you got to
What about you?
No,
I would love to hear your.
I never, I mean, I'll do a little like maybe texting or something of that sort, or maybe emailing or something that sort. But I try to be very clean and clear and tell you what the show is about and what we kind of expect. And we're always very conversational on this show and the Chris Christine show. We have a center topic that we bring you in for, whatever you say, you're whatever your expertise would be. We bring you in, and then we would just like get to know you on the podcast, and we ask questions. You tell your story, of course, and then we kind of we have questions on the fly. Like we don't have anything written down. Like I rarely ever write any questions down for an interview ever. I want to know kind of like what we're going to talk about, and basically what your name is, what you do, and then we'll kind of like the questions always seem to evolve when I do interviews. That's kind of the way I've always done it. I like to have conversations.
See, I'm going to push back on that because you're a pro. I mean, you're a great. You're naturally a great conversationalist, and you've been doing podcasts. So, but when you're talking, so I'm pushing back only because, like, I myself didn't come in here nervous because I trusted. I've heard your stuff, and I know that you're a pro, and I trust my knowledge of how to do a good podcast. But if you're dealing with somebody who's starting episode 5, 6, 7, like very early on in their journey,
okay,
they don't have the same podcasting etiquette or understanding and the failures behind them that they can now, the blooper reels behind them in the past.
Right. Yeah.
So it's hard. I read something on LinkedIn, and I love this, the difference between improvising and winging it. And I think it's so important to this conversation because winging it, you're not winging it right now. You're improvising because you have in your mind, 10 different questions or 10 different topics that that somebody in this industry would want to talk about. And you're just filtering through that. I don't know if they're written down or not in front of you, but I'm assuming that's how it's happening. It's just, you're not winging it. You're improvising. Okay, I'm not going to ask this question. I'm going to ask this question. But winging it is like, go in with like, I don't know you, I don't know context, I don't know anything, and we're just going to make this work. That goes back to like your original question about the farts and beer.
Yes, those guys.
Podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Sludge and burp. Yeah, I got
sludge and burp. So it's like it's really hard because that's like winging it, and that's why I go back to that. You have to be talented.
Right, definitely. I definitely appreciate that, man. Well, thanks for commenting on my great winging it skills. I appreciate it, man. No, but seriously though, I try to make it very natural and feel like my whole background's been in radio and radio broadcasting. So I know things are scripted there, and I do have a few things written down. I know our very first interview that we did on the Chris Christine show, we were completely scripted. We had I had my 5 questions, she had her 5 questions, and we just alternated back and forth with the guest, and it worked. It did do that. Eventually we kind of started doing things off the cuff, and wherever the conversation happens to be at that point, like if you're talking about something serious and all of a sudden you just start to throw in your next question on the list, which is completely off topic, completely different, thing totally. And it kind of throws the conversation, like a wrench in the conversation. And you're like, what are you talking about? We're talking about this. Now you're trying to talk about that. It throws it off if you're trying to just read down a list of questions, and I've been interviewed, and I had a horrible interview once when he was just doing that. In fact, he even asked the same question twice. and I'm like, well, I just answered that 2 seconds ago, but I'll answer it again. Whatever. It was literally exact question. Like he was just reading a list, and I see him do it. It goes on Zoom or whatever. And I could see him reading it, on his paper or whatever he was doing. But I try to.
So I'm not trying to say that, if you stink at it, you're going to stink at it forever. It's a skill that you'll pick up, not you, but you starting out, you will get better at this. And it's just a question of reps. And it's just a question of, I think that's an incredible story. I would love that clip just to hear that a podcaster who's very comfortable started off his first show scripting it. And that's lots and lots of podcasters start off that way.
Right. But I think you lose a little bit of the natural, organic feel of the conversation. It gets lost.
100% you do. 100%.
And then
but you need to do that in order to just come in comfortable and not be scared. And then, by episode 10, 15, I don't even think it takes past 10 for somebody who's decent at it, unless they have other issues. But if they're decent at conversations and not scared of people, so then there's, you get better with each rep. And then you can start relying on we're just having a conversation. That's it's a hard expectation for episode 1.
Yeah, unless you've done it a few times prior to that. But luckily I had a little experience going into this show with the other show a little bit. But even still, I think we're still fairly new because at this point, when I started this show, I was only doing that show for probably 2 years, I think at that point, and stuff, like every week or whatever and stuff, and doing it with another person. And I think also I mentioned this before is that like I've always wanted to get into podcasting before Christine and I started our show, but I didn't want to do it alone. Like I had this fear of I didn't want to do a solo show all by myself, and I knew nothing about interviews. Like I didn't know how to even do an interview on a computer. Like only thing I ever knew was 2 people in the same room, 2 separate microphones. Let's talk. That's all I ever knew. So I'm like, well, how can I do a show? And I asked Christine, I was like, well, you want to do it with me? Because I don't think I can do it by myself. And that's when we kind of started that show from there. So it's kind of evolved. So I know doing solo shows, it's tricky, it's hard. It does help if you have a script or an outline or something like that to follow. It does help. There's many times, almost 99% of the times on Podtastic Audio, I guess, improv the entire show. But if I don't like a section, what I'll do is I'll stop it, cut it out, and retake that section again. So that's kind of as I do when I go through the recording of Podtastic Audio. A little behind the scenes there, kids. So that's how I do it. But
love it.
Yeah. So Ahron, this has been so fantastic having you on, joining me all the way from Israel, man. So where can all of our listeners find out all about you and all your wonderful stuff and all your services?
So I am very active. I don't know, maybe I just added that in because that's, that's what podcasts do with the most amazing, wonderful, awesome guest. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try to post every day tips, tricks, how to get started with podcasting, how to optimize your podcast that's already running. I try to open the conversation that this is a work in progress. We're all trying to grow, and LinkedIn is a great place to find me. If you are interested, to talk, and I'm always up to talking. I would say I'm a podcaster. I can't shut up, but you can book a call there. I would love to hear. I would love to talk about different podcasts out there. It's a wonderful world of podcasts, and LinkedIn has allowed me to meet so many amazing podcasters and creators, and that I'm very grateful for that. So LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll put a link to this into the show notes of this episode. Look down below, and there it is. Well, Ahron, this has been so great, man, having you on the show, and I really appreciate you taking your time today to chat with me over here in San Diego. And you have a great rest of your week, man.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me experience this wonderful show and just learning from your great questions and your great improvising. It was a great experience.
Thanks, man.